Welcome, everybody. Glad to have you. And we did this or scheduled this on a weekend because we had a number of people were asking for a time that is a little more convenient for them because of work and what have you. So happy to do that, and we'll see how everybody receives it, and number of turnouts, and whether it makes sense. For those of you that are new, this is our, I think, our 12th or 13th webinar. And then when you add the Q&A sessions that we have with our clients specifically, those are probably about three, so about 15 of these. This is the third session on due diligence, and anticipating that it'll be total of five, because if not, the information will be too overwhelming, so trying to break it down into meaningful categories. For those of you that are new, we're thrilled to have you. Would highly recommend that you go to the YouTube channel and watch the first two due diligence sessions, especially because there's stuff that's going to be referred to today and in prior sessions that were covered in previous webinars. So you'll be completely up to date. And for those of you, again, that are new to these webinars, this is all based on a building block mentality. These webinars, the articles that I write, etc., those should all be viewed to augment your information and your knowledge base. It's no substitute for the full program that we provide that covers every step of the business buying process. And so these are, you look at our course, How to Buy a Good Business at a Great Price, is really your library, and this is additional information, but you'll find it very helpful. And then the other YouTube videos that you'll find, if you go to the playlist area, that'll have all the information, all those webinars, and right from buying the right business to 10 commandments to creating deal flow and what have you. So you'll certainly find them very helpful, because, as you know, the social media is just rampant with 1-minute videos, which is a little ridiculous. And I understand, the idea behind it, to catch people's attention, or as my son says, people have the attention span of a tomato. And so you do these 1-minute videos, but the reality is, I mean, how much could you really cover in a minute? So those other ones, they're a little longer, but you could get some great information. The next webinar after today is going to be on July the 12th. That's strictly for our clients. That's a Q&A session. We have those every couple of weeks. And then we will be doing due diligence part 4 on July the 18th. But there'll be an email circulated to everybody. I had a conversation this week. I get on LinkedIn a bunch of these inquiries, and I had somebody who's sent me a message, and they deem themselves to be a searcher, and asked if I could spend a few minutes with them. They had some questions, and I'm always happy to do that. And I got on the phone with them, and it was very timely, because they were telling me that they have this they call this their networking group of like-minded searchers, which always makes me nervous, because when you have too many people in the room who don't know what they're doing, you always go on to the you could go off the reservation pretty quickly. But they told me they have this group of 17 people. They had just joined. They lost their job, and they were going to be devoting themselves full-time to searching. They were a graduate from Wharton, and they joined this group, and there were 17 of them. And the question that they asked me was, there's 15 people in their group that, and that's why this group formed, because they're of the opinion that they should be acquiring businesses and looking at them strictly from a financial perspective. In other words, that's where their focus is, that if the numbers make sense, it's a business worth pursuing. And then this person went on to explain that there was one in the group of the 17 that disagreed with that. And this individual who had just joined was not certain whether or not that makes sense. So the way they postured it was, 15 of them felt that you buy a business based solely on the financials, and you look at that from the modeling. And the other one was, you look at it, and the word they used was more holistically, that grossly overused word, which sort of in its entirety. And so I went on and I asked them how long this group has been in place, and they said it was a little, I think they mentioned 14 or 15 months, and asked out of the 16 other people in the group who had bought a business yet, and no one had. I said, well, you just answered your own question. I said, because the way I'm going to tell you is, you do not look at a business solely from the financials. We've talked about that earlier. That's a small part of the equation. That's the easiest part of due diligence. And if you don't look at this entire acquisition from a standpoint of all the key categories that need to be not only investigated, but areas that need to match with your skill set, you're going to end up more than likely buying the wrong business. It's been proven repeatedly that the financial model is not adequate to make a decision. It's part of the decision. It is not all of the decision. Obviously, if everything else fits into place and the numbers don't make sense, it's not a good potential acquisition, but it's not based on numbers alone. And we talked about it at the top of the pyramid is matching your skill set to the business, to the right business. That is without question the single most important thing. And so there's 11. What we're going to do is we're going to go through a couple of key categories today. There's 11 categories that you have to investigate in due diligence. The financials and other ones we've covered before. Today we're going to cover related to the sales and marketing. And so see if you could go ahead and tee up the first slide. That would be great, and we can get going. So in due diligence, we talk about what needs to be investigated, and it's only one thing, which is everything. So there's 11 key categories that we've that need to be investigated: financials, assets, sales, marketing, employees, systems, competition, customers, contracts, suppliers, legal, and corporate. The ones that are highlighted, sales and marketing, we are going to cover today. We have previously covered financials and assets and systems and competitions. And then the next webinar, we'll probably break it down into two, but today we're going to cover sales and marketing. And so when you look at your due diligence, and again, for anybody who's joining us for the first time, it's important to understand that your due diligence begins the minute a business is of interest to you. So as soon as you find a business, whether it be online, whether it be a direct search, as soon as you have that contact, get that first bit of information, whether it be a SIM, whether it be an overview document, you've got to start your due diligence. Obviously, the more formal due diligence is more encompassing, but you've got to start investigating the business because you have a limited time to complete your due diligence. So today, again, we're going to cover sales and marketing, and next session we'll do customers and suppliers and employees, which are really important, and legal and corporate will be pretty simple. Okay, so let's get the party started. First slide. Okay, sales and marketing due diligence, and there's an overlap between the two. I'm older than most of you folks on this call. When I first started working, sales and marketing were always considered a single discipline. People were vice presidents of sales and marketing. You worked in sales and marketing. And the reality is, as time goes on and people realize that sales and marketing are two very distinct disciplines. Sales is not marketing and marketing is not sales, but there are some commonalities for due diligence. And we talk about looking at the sales and marketing, you're investigating how the business is currently conducting its sales process and its marketing function. Okay, so very important to, when I say stay in the moment, when you're looking at a business and doing your due diligence, staying in the moment is critically important because you want to understand, what are you getting when you buy this business? What are you taking over? You don't want to start going down the wrong path of thinking about all the things that you could put into place related to the business and sales and marketing. The first and most important thing is to determine, what am I getting when I buy this business on day one? What is in place? Buyers typically get way too caught up in all the incredible things that they think they can do about the business. And I've been working and speaking with business buyer for decades, and here are some of the common things that I hear from people when they start their due diligence and they start looking at the sales and marketing, and some of the ways that they again go down the wrong path. They'll tell me things like, the company doesn't even have a website, or there's no sales process in place, or they call it their sales team, but it's only customer service, or can you believe they don't even have a marketing plan? All I need to do is add tech to this business. Those are all reasonable perceptions, but they serve no purpose during the due diligence, the primary stage of due diligence, because these are all things that you think you may be able to do, and you don't know enough about the business to even determine if any of those are viable. So again, critically important, stay in the moment. So in sales and marketing and due diligence, again, the overlap, sales, you're going to come across sellers. This is going to be a very typical conversation. You as the buyer ask the seller, well, what could be done to increase sales? And the seller is going to tell you, hire more salespeople, do more marketing, advertise, attend trade shows. And you'll typically answer back, well, why haven't you done them? And you're going to get a blank stare. Hmm. So understanding that this, what they tell you are things that you should be doing. Again, you'll have to validate that on your own. You want to go back and determine what it is that they have in place, and does it do those initiatives make sense, and measure them. So let's talk first about marketing due diligence. In marketing due diligence, you're going to be shocked to find out that many, many companies, especially in the lower market, have absolutely no concrete marketing plan whatsoever. That's just the fact. They're flying by the seat of their pants. It's a lot of gut marketing, and you're going to suffer from and have to avoid the Monday morning quarterback syndrome, because it's very easy to critique from the outside, especially when you know nothing. And so again, understanding what's in place versus going along and trying to say, well, here's all the things that we can do. It's very easy to critique and be this, what we call this Monday morning quarterback syndrome. So understand who's in charge of the marketing. Is there a dedicated marketing person or a team? Gut marketing is what you come across from a business that's been around 10, 20, 30 years, and the owner or owners are operating the business based on gut. And it's not erratic or illogical gut. They have the guts of the business in their belly. They know what works, or they think they know what works, or they've done different things. So they have a different feel for the business. It may be the wrong feel, but they have a different feel for the business. But oftentimes gut marketing works because they just have this sense and familiarity with the business, the industry, and the customers. So sometimes when you don't see a marketing plan, or they can't really define the marketing, it's because they've been running it based on gut. Question: does the company even know what business they are in? And this is pretty important, because if you take a look at certain businesses, one of the businesses that I was in years ago, which is a retail merchandising company, which we provided services to retailers to help them put stock from the back room on the shelves, to make sure that merchandise that was scheduled to go for be featured in ads was prominently displayed in the stores. And we provided this third-party service. And when people used to ask me what business I'm in, I used to tell them that I'm in the retail business. And they said, "Oh, you own stores?" I said, "No, I don't own stores. I help retailers generate more sales." And so when you look at the business and ask, understanding is, do these sellers even know what business they're in? And it's not necessarily just the product or service they're selling. They may be providing a service that's more comprehensive than that. Because when we say what service you're in, that ties directly to how you're going to evaluate the marketing and consider potential marketing in the future. And I know many of you have business school degrees, and plenty of you probably taking marketing classes, and we'll get into more clear definition of it. But understanding the business that you're in is critically important. What your customers are looking for. Is marketing a priority or an afterthought? You want to also get copies and access to all marketing materials, past and current, of what the company is presently doing. Marketing is simple. It's incredibly simple. You got to figure out who are the target customers, what do they want, what are they willing to pay, and how to get it to them. That's it. That's marketing in a nutshell. And of course, you want to be able to get it to them at a price that they're willing to pay. But the customers and data always have the answers, but sometimes the employees already know it. So it depends on the type of business. You may not have the opportunity to speak to any employees before you complete a transaction. But if you have that luxury, very often the people that are on the front lines, whether it be salespeople or individuals dealing with customers, they oftentimes have the answer versus the owners of the business who think they have the answer. It's the frontline people that know what feedback they're getting from customers. So if the situation allows for interaction with the employees, get their input, what they would do, what they would not do, why do they do it, what they would do differently. And again, does the company know why their customers buy from them? This is one of the 36 questions that we have in the lesson on meeting the seller. And key question to ask is, Mr. or Mrs. Seller, why do your customers buy from you? Oftentimes, they can't even define that. So in marketing due diligence, you have to do, it says an assessment on 3 fronts, and I apologize, that's a typo because it's an assessment on 4 fronts. What the company did, what the company does, what the competition does, and what you can do in the future. And when we talk about what the company did, these are past initiatives. What worked? What didn't work? Why? Do they even know why? There's a very common thing that oh, we tried it, it didn't work. But you're going to find out that measurement very often doesn't take place. So when you're investigating the marketing component of the due diligence, you want to understand, again, what have they done in the past, why it worked or what didn't, and did they measure it? Because one of the critical things that you're going to want to incorporate in your business when you become a business owner shortly is whatever gets measured gets done. That's a quote from a buddy of mine, Tony Romano, who I did some consulting work with, and then we became fast and furious friends. A brilliant guy. He worked as an executive for UPS for many years, and he had this statement, which was, whatever gets measured gets done. And so you're going to want to ultimately incorporate that thinking into your business, but you'll come across owners and say, well, I've got this marketing material here. You said that you did in the past and it didn't work. Why? You say, we tried it, it didn't work. Well, that's not an answer. So you have to be able to scrub in, because even though you're evaluating what you're getting, at some point you're going to look into think, can we do some incorporate some initiatives that may work? What the company currently has in place. So here's what you need to know related to this piece of the marketing. How did it come about? What was the thought process that brought them to that marketing strategy? How is it measured? Do they have any data on it? How much money does the company spend on marketing each year? Really important. If you recall when we talked about financials and the financial due diligence and taking the financial statements for the last 3 years and comparing them line item by line item, you are going to be astounded how many companies will cut their marketing the year before they're ready to sell their business. And the problem for you, the buyer, is very often those cutbacks are not going to impact the business until a year or so later. And so very important when you look at those numbers, if they cut marketing, it's the old proverbial, they're trying to put lipstick on a pig and pretty up the numbers. That's one of the areas where owners stupidly will cut back on marketing to improve their profits prior to a sell. So again, how much money do they spend on marketing each year? That's a drop down looking at the financials and comparing if they've increased or decreased purposely. But again, generally speaking, over a period of time, have they increased or decreased? Is the company clear on what its strengths and weaknesses are? And there's a number of you on the call that we've had consulting conversations, and you've told me about things that you could do with the business, or we've talked about strengths and the weaknesses. And you said, well, the seller has said this and the seller has said that. And that's wonderful, but you can't believe them. You have to do your investigation. That's why it's called due diligence. And are the company's strengths made clear to the customers? If the customers were asked to list the company's strengths and weaknesses, would they be the same as the company's list? And that's where you can understand a potential disconnect between what the company is doing and what you may want to ultimately do when you learn a little bit more about the business. So these are all questions that you're going to be put forth to the seller, but you need to do your own validation and investigation. These are the answers that you need to get, or these are the questions that you need to get answered. Understanding the competition related to marketing. It's very simple. Hey, Mr. Seller, what are the other guys doing? And get ready to be flabbergasted, because it's amazing how many business owners have no clue what the competition is doing. And no matter what they tell you, you need to validate it. And it's very easy. You just visit the competition, whether it be an online visit, whether it be a bricks and mortar business, whatever it may be. You can call their salespeople. We'll talk about this in a minute. We talked about in due diligence webinar number 2, a deep dive into competition. But first, ask the seller, what are the competitors doing? You're not asking them so much from a standpoint saying, well, you just want to, you want to get that information, your question answered. It's getting a sense of, does the seller even understand what the competitors are doing? And very often they won't. What you can do in the future. And I caution everybody when you're acquiring a business, I talk about it. I know you're probably sick of me hearing it from me, but when you first acquire a business, you do nothing. You first have to learn the business. So you want to be careful, because unless you've been in this type of business, first you must learn it, but don't over index. Remember, You're acquiring status quo. So the things that we just talked about related to investigating the marketing, you just want to get a real good sense of what is the business doing right now. Is it working? Is it not working? Is it being measured? What are the competitors doing? So you have an understanding related to the marketing. Because if, for example, they're a marketing machine and doing all these incredible things, or spending all this gobs of money related to marketing, and it's not moving the needle, there's a high level of concern. Because if you're not a marketing expert and they're marketing gurus allegedly, and it's not having an impact, you have to give some considerable thought to whether that business could potentially scale. What you can do in the future, again, when we talk about being delusional, we talk about that commandment number 4 when we have our lesson on the 10 commandments, which is you want to fall in love with the profit and not the product. So again, that leads into the idea when you're looking at this business, and please, when you're looking at this business and investigating the marketing, it's the status quo that you want to think about. Because if you start getting, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that, and I could build a website and I'm going to add tech to this business and all these wonderful things, it sounds great, but that's not in place yet. Your job during due diligence is to understand, again, what you are getting. Go ahead, Sia. Before we go on to the sales due diligence, does anybody have any question related to the marketing piece?
Yes, there is. So Britton, do you want to go ahead and jump in and ask?
Yeah, thanks. It just kind of hit me, Richard, as you've gone through a lot of these kind of due diligence items. Should I be thinking about this as once I enter in due diligence, we have, the LOI signed, we've started. I almost cut up all the sections of due diligence and set a reoccurring meeting almost maybe twice a week with the owner. And it's like an hour session and we just go through the marketing. Because I think some of these questions I might be able to infer, but it sounds like it would almost be like an interview that I can only really get from the seller. And is that your intention through these questions, or is it really just for me to like go and just like figure out on my own? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. So there's a couple of prongs to the answer. The first thing is you're starting off and asking the seller two parts. Number, tell me what you do for marketing, who's in charge, what type of initiatives have you put into place in the past? Again, what has worked, what hasn't worked, etc. Can you provide me with all the marketing materials? We say marketing materials, it could be, email templates that they're sending out to people, or it could be some other businesses. We have one client now looking at a business that's a very much a sort of old style mailer type of business. And that may be the marketing done that way to local businesses where you're sending them a flyer. So you want to get a copy of that. So the first part is asking the seller, getting their information. What did you do in the past? What worked? What didn't work? What are you currently doing, etc. Marketing materials, get that information, and then you're going to be digging into it on your own. That's the second piece. But you wouldn't start off doing this on your own. You first want to get their input. And if you have an opportunity to speak to the employees, that's great. And using that, validating what they're telling you. In other words, they say, "Oh yeah, if you guys speak to a number of sellers, I mean, you're going to be flabbergasted at some point to say, oh yeah, this, we did this marketing campaign. It was terrific. Oh, we did this other one. It was terrible. Well, what does that mean?
Right.
Like, it's like, I can't quantify that. So is there any data? And
Mhm.
so, and unfortunately, very often you won't have any, but at least you'll get a very good understanding is it work? You want to understand is it working at least to a certain level? Because that's what you're inheriting. Imagine you buy a business, it's a new business, you know nothing about the business, you know nothing about the industry, your skill set matches, and so you're confident with the acquisition, but you're going to get in there for a little while, at least 6 months, and learn the business. But during that time, the current marketing initiatives that they have in place have to continue. That's what's going to continue. You're not going in and changing anything on day one. And so that's why it's so important to understand, okay, with what I'm getting, does this even make sense? Okay. And that's why you're validating. So you speak to the seller or interview them, have a good conversation, validate what they're saying. And one of the most beautiful ways to verify marketing is find out what the competition is doing. Every business has competitors. So find out what the competition is doing. And one way to do that is, calling the competition or asking them questions or going onto their website or visiting their premises. But You get a much more complete picture when you understand what the competitors are doing. So hopefully, I apologize for the long-winded answer,
No,
but
that's
hopefully
good.
that gives you a good perspective.
That's perfect.
Any other questions related to marketing before we move on?
Yeah, I just have a quick question. So
Sure.
how do you measure marketing? Like, how do you measure the data of what works and what doesn't work? Is there software? Do you use a particular software or?
It's a great question. A company that's really paying proper attention to its marketing will have its either they'll be using something external or its own internal measurement to determine. It could be as simple as, last month we spent $4,000 on marketing and we generated $12,000 in orders, and the month before we spent $3,000 and got X amount. It's whatever is being used. Now there are some potential software programs to be used. However, there's various stages of it. For example, marketing, there's marketing to get new clients, and there's marketing to keep marketing to existing clients. So at the very, very least, the most simple metric in the world of marketing is, what is the cost per acquisition? How much does it cost you to get a new client? And if an owner has no idea what that number is, they probably have absolutely no idea whatsoever about the rest of their marketing as far as granular information. And so the measurement piece is what drives the data. And if they don't have even the simplest mechanism to measure the activity, that's something that you're going to have to implement. And you'll be surprised that they won't. But at its very least is the cost per acquisition. Because marketing, the beautiful thing about marketing is there's always it's cause and effect. Meaning, if you spend X, you should generate Y. And based on that, you can make your determination. However, you want to make sure, very often small businesses, they abort too early. Or they go into something gangbusters and they didn't get immediate results. And that's not marketing. Marketing is a sustained effort. It's ongoing. And the fundamental thing going forward, I see us clapping. And the fundamental thing going forward is, and I'll talk about what you're going to put into place, but what I would suggest, Gabe, is have, the best mindset and strategy to have related to marketing is this. You want to test, 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 and test again. And as soon as you think you have it right, test it again. Because that's where you really are able to determine whether or not what works and to what extent. When you see it, people spend lots of money on email marketing and they're generating X number of orders. But maybe if you change the email or you send it to a different group, it's the testing process that's really, really important. So as far as software is concerned, the software related to email marketing, as an example, most of the programs where you buy, let's say, email lists or whatever, they will have built-in metrics to determine the open rate, the cost of conversion, etc. Google Analytics. Familiar with Google Analytics?
Yes, I do know about Google Analytics.
Okay, so Google Analytics, if you have an e-commerce business or a component e-commerce, Google Analytics is phenomenal because it'll tell you number of visits, conversions, etc., what pages. For anybody who's looking, if you want to measure related to website, there's a software called Hotjar. Hotjar, that will it's like a heat map, and it'll show you on your website on various pages how many what time people are spending on various pages and links, and it's really cool. It's really, really cool. On the other programs that are not necessarily e-commerce related or could be old-fashioned marketing, there's got to be a mechanism put into place to measure it.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, let's go on to sales.
All right.
Everybody, if you'd like to put on your camera, we'd like to see your happy face, but we understand if you don't, it's totally cool. Okay, sales due diligence. Step one. Now, we talk about sales due diligence. Different companies have different areas as we talk about sales. Some companies don't have any salespeople. Some companies will have a robust sales team. And so when we're talking about sales, there's multi-prongs to it, but it's part of it is defining the sales processes, because from there you can determine how sales are done and whether or not it's effective. So step one is to define the sales process itself. And so the way you want to look at this is from presentation. When I say presentation, is from the time that the company presents its product or service through to the order, through to the shipping, through to the collection. Not all businesses have these components into this. If you're buying a chain of dry cleaners, there's no necessarily an order, shipping, or collection process, but yet there is. Or the presentation is when someone comes into the store for the first time and they take their order, and then it's processed in the back. How do they deliver it to them? How do they collect? That's the sales process. So regardless of the business, there will be some variation of this. Other businesses that are good old-fashioned sales process, where a salesperson takes their briefcase and they're going out and banging doors and making sales presentations, and then they're following up for an order and then shipping out some merchandise, and how do they get paid? That's their process. If it's an e-commerce business, then it's what's on the website and how do people place an order and how do people receive their merchandise and how is the money collected. So you must be crystal clear about this before you dig in. Okay, what are those steps? And you'll ask, depending on the type of business, what does that flow chart look like for the sales process? And we talk about double click the process steps, and then you develop your investigation plan. Now, today, we can go into 100 different businesses. They'll have a different sales process. But when you say presentation, whatever business you're looking at, how do they present their business? How do they present their products? So, for example, one of our clients was looking at a distributor that also had a retail outlet and did business from both. And there was people would come in. What is their presentation? Well, how does this product look on the shelves? That's their presentation. The orders, how is it taken? Are there people in the store or staff in the store that are helping people? And are they delivering it or taking it with them? Are they paying cash? Or are they putting on a credit card? Or are they being billed? The same in the distribution business was, how is their sales team going out and presenting the product? And when they go out and present it, how are the customers placing an order? Is it they give it to the salesperson, or they say thank you and then they call it in or go online? So understanding those steps, and from there you determine your investigation. How are customers solicited? And what is the reporting function? Sales forecasts and accountability. If you're buying a business with a sales team, whatever that sales team looks like, probably the most important thing that you need to understand is what is the level of accountability by the salespeople and how they operate. They're a whole different breed, folks. The salespeople, when we're talking about pure salespeople, it's a whole different breed. And we'll talk about that in a minute, but understanding the accountability is really, really important, because very often people within the organization, culturally within the organization, oftentimes even the owner within the organization, everybody's scared of the sales team. They don't want to mess with the sales team, because the reality is in the world of business, nothing happens till somebody sells something. And so very often they're afraid of stepping on their toes or digging too deeply. But you need to understand, when it comes to reporting and sales forecasts, what is the level of accountability and to whom? In the sales process, is it a one-time or ongoing client relationship? And the level of tech and automation, if it's used across the board, is it just good old-fashioned selling? And there's nothing wrong with that too. We have someone's on the call today. They're looking at a business in landscaping, and you'll nod and we'll talk about you, who you are. But in that type of business, the selling process is twofold. Either someone says, I'm interested in your service, and the owner may go to the house to talk about it, or it could be that the workers are doing the work in the neighborhood and they go up and say, could I have your business card? That may be the sales process. But understanding what that is and how is it, if they do give out a sales card, do they tell the owner? Or do they take the person's name, and does the owner follow up? That's understanding the sales process. We're going to go to step 2, Miss Sia. Are they salespeople or order takers? If there are salespeople, and I'm talking about human being salespeople, whether they be on the phone or on the road. Yesterday, I had to renew my PCI compliance with our website. The PCI compliance is just a part of functions that making sure that there's certain back-end systems in place to protect people's privacy, credit card information, etc. Called PCI compliance. Got to renew it every year. And so I got a call from the company that does it called Security Metrics, and a very nice guy left me a message. His name was Stetson, which I thought is a very cool name. He said his name is Stetson. He said, I'm calling you from the sales department and customer integration regarding your PCI compliance, whatever. And I called him up afterwards, and he said, he said, hi, it's Stetson with the sales team. Well, Stetson just took an order. I mean, that's what Stetson, he was an order taker. His goal, his job was any clients whose certificates were due to expire, they just made the phone call, and I called him up and said, how much is new cost for this year? He told me. I said, fine. Gave the credit card information. That was the end of it. That's not a salesperson per se. That's an order taker. But they're doing a level of solicitation. In that case, you want to make sure that that team is following up diligently, because my PCI certificate is due to expire on Wednesday. And so there has to be a mechanism in place to trigger those calls to make sure. And if anybody doesn't renew, why? Or if someone doesn't renew immediately, does it get elevated? Put up the food chain to make sure someone takes care of it. So if there are salespeople, does the sales team know what the marketing team is doing? You want to understand what is the revenue by salesperson. And this is especially important for outside sales. If there's an outside sales team, how much do they generate by salesperson? And this is a metric that you need to, a number that you need to get from the owner. And there are some industry metrics. For example, I think in like distribution business, certain business, it works out to about $2.5 million per salesperson. I think that was the number, but there are some industry metrics that you can uncover. And so understanding that, what do they do each day? What is their level of autonomy, their reporting and their accountability, and who oversees them? And again, keep in mind, you're going to buy a business. You're new at this. Okay. There's all the staff that you have. When you have outside salespeople, there needs to be an understanding of what they're doing every day and what the reporting is, because if it's like the wild west and nobody is reporting, you could rest assured that when a new owner comes into place, they're going to report less. Okay, so you need to get a handle on understanding how this all works and who oversees them. Salespeople typically operate in superlatives, and hopefully you'll have an opportunity to talk to them before the transaction, if in fact there are key salespeople. You ask a salesperson how things are. Things are great, or things are terrible, or whatever. Like, I have no clue what that means. Okay, give someone who says, sales are up by 6.2%. I've got, 22 clients in the pipeline at this last year and the prior years. Now I got 27. My close rate, I have to visit with 72 clients or speak to 72 before I close an order. Here's my average. That's entirely different than things are great and things are terrible. And so again, it's understanding that it's got to be put into numbers. That's data. Terrible or terrific or awful is not data. Okay, so when you get into investigating the sales team, understanding how do they report, how are they accountable, and how do they measure this? Going forward, you need the team to operate in probabilities. And I've always had this one, a sales team of salespeople, because people would say to me, I'd say to them, okay, you're working on a certain file with a client. You're making a couple of sales pitch. What do you think the chances are we're going to close the deal? And they would say likely. Now, what likely means to me is entirely different what likely means to them. And by the way, if you ever want to read a great book that delves into that more deeply, it's called How to Decide by Annie Duke. She's a World Series of Poker champion. She's written 2 books. One is How to Decide, and one is How to Quit. Believe it or not, they're phenomenal books. When we talk about probabilities, when you get to salespeople, what are the chances that you're going to close the Acme file? And the salesperson says, "Oh, pretty good." Now, when they say pretty good, they may be thinking, I'm thinking when I ask that question, pretty good means like 80%. They may be thinking pretty good is like 25%. And so you want to get people and your world talking in probabilities and percentages, as opposed to saying, what What are the probabilities percentage-wise that that's going to close? Because if you ask that question, suddenly they tell you 25%. That's a whole different perspective that you're going to have on things. So understanding that, again, going forward, you want to operate in probabilities. And this is especially important related to the sales team and the sales effort, because people talk in superlatives, as we talked about before. And you may come across some business where the customer support actually may be the sales team. And that's okay too. But again, understanding how they function is critically important. Step number 3, who's who in the zoo? Who are the reps? Is there any salesperson concentration? Meaning you have one salesperson who was involved in one business, had one salesperson, he did like 70% of the sales. And he was a real schmuck. It was really hard to deal with. My sales manager used to say, he said, let's just take a plate of food and shove it under his door and keep him fed and get him out to work. He was an impossible guy to deal with, but except the one thing was customers actually liked him and he was honest. But he was not he just wasn't a good guy, but he was honest and treated the customers properly. But if you have that type of concentration, that may not be much different from having customer concentration, because if that person leaves, you want to make sure you understand what makes that person tick, because they're generating a lot of the sales. What is their compensation? Do they do any travel? Will they stay? You may not get to meet any of the salespeople. And so if there's any one salesperson that represents a disproportionate amount of the revenue generation, you are going to have that as a contingency in your LOI or contract. You're going to have to speak to that person before the deal closes. It may be your last contingency, like you're speaking with other employees, but that's really important to understand. Their biggest challenge, there's often a massive disconnect between the reps and the company. And so some of this you may only find out afterwards or be able to deal with after, but by having the opportunity to understand how the people think, who are the key people, and how the owner perceives them, you can understand, is there a really good connection? Are they integrated? Are they thinking? Are their thought? Are their strategies aligned, or they're all just working in different directions? And again, these are all things you do before you buy the business. Understand, we talked about reps have their superlatives, but they are on the front lines with customers. So they're hearing the information firsthand. Typically, they'll take the path of least resistance. So when you do buy a business, you have to quantify how things are done. And that was a good part of today's session, is to really hammer home with you that measuring is so important. Understanding how it's measured now and measuring once you take over. How involved are the reps in understanding the company's financials? And this is very important, is the degree you want to share it. I've always believed in sharing my company financials with my team so they understand we're all marching in the same direction. Okay. And why sometimes we have to fire customers because they're not profitable sales. And the biggie, who, what, where, why, how does the competition do it? So when it comes to salespeople, you know what the easiest way to verify the sales team on the competition? Call them like you're a customer. Play the role like you're a customer. And you call them up and ask to speak to a salesperson. Before we go on, I want to tell you about a situation where we had, we talk about customer support and sales team before we get into the Q&A, which was, I was working with a company that was manufacturing a specialized item in the outdoor world. And is more related to, think about this, related to, watercraft. And it was a critical part, mission critical part. There was only a few competitors in the business. They had a good product. And when we got into talking about their sales team, they had 2 components. They talked about the importance of product knowledge when someone calls their company, and said so when you'd call up, people needed something very specific to fit. And so they'd speak to a customer service person. Oftentimes that went on to a salesperson internally. And they would have the conversation to help them out to make sure they bought the right product. And so that was a combination of the customer support and the internal salesperson being the sales team. But they also had a different component to this. And to show you how wacko some people are, is they had an external sales force. This is a global company, an external sales force, but they didn't have a lot of salespeople. They had like 4 salespeople in America and 2 of them in Europe. It was sort of crazy. And when we asked them about, for example, why don't you have more salespeople in Europe? They said it's very, very expensive to hire a new salesperson. We said, okay, well, let's walk through this thought process. And they had one particular territory where they had a new salesperson. They were doing about they were doing in this one particular area about $400,000 in volume, and they had more like an order taker in the area. They said, well, you know, we put in that person, costs us $120,000 a year, and it really takes a while till they're good going. So we started digging into the numbers and said to them, well, that person that you put into place, it took 2 years to get going, but from that 400,000, they're now doing $2.5 million in that territory. And so the point that we're trying to make with them was, why wouldn't you be putting in more salespeople? At least to them, they said, wow, it's $100,000 plus to put them into place. I said, but yes, you idiot. In 2 years, you got to $2.5 million. And they were like so obsessed with this $100,000 ticket that like, it was like, guys, give your head a shake. This makes no sense whatsoever. And I will promise you, you will not believe how many times you will encounter something similar. And so this all plays to this whole thing that I'm trying to teach and preach to everybody, that the owner may have only part of the answer. If you just took the seller at their word in that situation, you would say to them, how come you don't have more salespeople? And they would say to you, it's very expensive to put in a new salesperson and it may not always work. And you say, end the story. And in your mind, you think, well, I can't put in new salespeople in the future. Versus taking that answer from the seller and drilling down on it and saying, well, why? What does it mean? And then you go back and then you realize you could draw your own conclusions. So that's the point of trying to understand when you look at due diligence. And I get almost pissed off when I speak to some clients. They say, the seller told me this, this, and this. I said, well, that's great. Is that where it ends? That's not where it ends. That's where it begins. Okay, so understanding all these things we talk about in due diligence, the seller, the business, what they're currently doing provides the template for the information that you're going to start to investigate. But you have to dig into that, because it's not just checking to see what they're currently doing. You want to know what you're getting, but you got to validate that information. So I think that's it related to sales and marketing. And we'll have time for any Q&A. The next session that we'll do, which on due diligence, will be later on the next month, and we'll cover customers, suppliers, and hopefully employees as well, because that's a whole, as I said, a whole different kettle of fish. That's a whole different group dealing with employees and how to investigate those. So if anybody has any questions, and when we open this up, it's whatever you would like to ask about. It doesn't have to be on today's subjects. So we could open up all the mics and see whether we have 2 or 50 questions. That's fine. Whatever people want to ask.
Excellent. Gabe's hand was up first.
Hey, yeah, I just have a question on, I guess you say we need to go and learn the business. So does that mean we should relocate every single time if you were to buy a business? Should you go and relocate? Is that necessary or no?
Not necessary. Depends where it is. I mean, I'm just a big believer that you need to get immersed in the business. I like the concept of potentially extracting yourself a little bit from the business and having it more, management operated. But at the beginning, you have to learn the business. And so if you're buying a business in a different geography, at the beginning, you have to be there to operate it. That's my take. I think you have to, if you buy one business, I've owned 14 of them, you buy one and then you're looking at a second one and it happens to be outside of the area, well, you don't have to keep relocating. You're hopefully going to take, it's something similar and you're going to take what you've learned to make sure you have the right people into place. But similarly, you may have to be spending some time there. If it's unrelated, then you have to spend more time. But I think the business itself dictates it. And especially when you're getting into your first business, you absolutely want to be there. Even if it's a pain in the ass and saying you can't, relocation is problematic. You don't want to operate from afar.
I see. Thank you.
Of course.
Awesome.
Okay, Dan.
Britain's next.
Hey, Richard, how would you describe or prioritize the various categories that you cover in due diligence? Because I would say from what we reviewed today, that's more of a good research for the future, but there's not something necessarily, to my understanding, that would be a deal breaker per se, right? Because in the due diligence period, you're trying to make sure, is there anything that I uncover that's going to, break something? Is there anything potentially in sales and marketing that would be like that maybe I'm not thinking of, or how would you prioritize?
Great question. So I would say probably the only thing that could potentially be a deal breaker in due diligence is if you have one salesperson who represents a disproportionate amount of sales and they can potentially easily leave, or you don't have confirmation that they're going to stay. And you see this quite a bit in businesses, for example, where there's a bidding process, or where there's maybe also be customer concentration, because there may be a relationship with, if they're doing government contracts or whatever it may be, they may have a special relationship with the people, the procurement officer. That's probably the only that's probably the only thing that may be a deal breaker potentially. The other thing is, of course, if their marketing is not is unscrupulous. Right? If they're doing something that you're not comfortable about the way that they're getting customers, something you just don't feel is right, that's an integrity issue. And
Sure.
I'd like to think that everybody that's on this call has a high degree of integrity and you'd walk away. But outside of those, these are two of those categories that are, in as much these are really confirmatory versus exploratory. There shouldn't be any red flags outside of those.
Okay. And then would you say what would you say is the biggest normal deal breaker, if you wouldn't mind just highlighting that for I it's a big question, but what would be the area that you're like, this is the number one due diligence item that unravels the deal?
The biggest
Financials.
reason why deals fall apart in due diligence is the financials, because
Okay.
what
Bank.
what was originally represented don't pan out. So that's definitely at the top of the list. Then you go into the issues like customer concentration, leases that can't be assigned, or where you have situations where the owner of the business owns the property and they haven't been paying themselves rent. So they represent to you that, the business makes $300,000 a year adjusted earnings. And then you find out, well, but you own the building, you haven't paid rent, and you want $15,000 a month rent going forward. Well, that's 180 grand. Now that business suddenly has adjusted earnings of 120. So the financials definitely a piece of that. Customer concentration, no doubt. But the single biggest reason why deals fall apart in due diligence, and I'll give you a crazy statistic, at the lower end of the market, that businesses that sell for under a couple of $1 million, 50% of the deals fall apart in due diligence. How crazy is that?
Wow. That's
And
nuts. Of already the crazy statistic of the businesses that aren't sold.
But and in those scenarios, the number one reason why they fall apart is because the buyer gets to the end hasn't allowed themselves enough time to do an effective due diligence. So they got suckered in by the broker and said, well, we'll give you 2 weeks for due diligence, which is ridiculous. And if they have an adequate amount of time, they get to the end of the due diligence period and they're still uncertain. They just haven't done a good enough job. And there's too many things that are uncertain. So they either make a devastating mistake, or they're uncertain and they just don't go through the transaction. That's why you got to start very early. But those would be the hierarchy of things.
Thank you, Richard.
Of course.
Wow. Oh, that was great. Daniel's next.
Thanks, Richard. This has been great. One question on pre-LOI due diligence. How far can you typically get in terms of getting information before you submit an LOI, especially when there's a intermediary that's running a process?
Okay. It's a fantastic question because it comes up quite a bit. You push for as much as you possibly can until the guy says you're being unreasonable. I mean, that's the way I look at it, okay, to try to get as much financials. I don't like the process with auctions. It does happen, but push for as much as you can. And
Okay.
one of the ways you could look at this is to always use the excuse, hey, I'm serious, I'm excited, I can get to the finish line, but a lot of this is new to me. Okay, so if you start getting a sense of frustration, just blame it on the fact that some of this is new to you, but push for as much information as you can. The other part, and Daniel, you haven't been on, I think this is one of the first webinars that you've participated in, right? So great to have you. But one of the things that's really important is when you put your LOI into place, whatever information you have or you haven't gotten, there's certain information that, for example, in cases where, geez, they won't even give me detailed financials. They're only giving me the SIM, and now they want an LOI, and I can't even get detailed financials. What you want to do is in your LOI, the contingencies to the LOI is almost like a schedule. Say within 3 days of acceptance of the LOI, I need 3 years of P&Ls, the tax returns, etc. Those hard things, those really important things that they didn't provide to you before your LOI, you want to get those as early as possible because you don't want to spend a whole lot of time and money digging into the due diligence if you don't have the information. So you put it almost like a hierarchy. So that's one thing to consider and put that right into the LOI. And clearly, I know when I look to buy a business, I push for as much information as I can in the beginning, like a maniac. I'll push until they tell me, listen, you're getting unreasonable. Okay.
Is that usually a written list like you would send over? Here's the, or is it just scheduled conversations that you're having?
Scheduled conversations.
Okay.
The things that you want to get is you want to get the P&Ls, the balance sheet. They may not provide the tax returns, which is sort of stupid because, I mean, it should tie in one to the other, but people, sellers and intermediaries have this crazy idea, well, we're not going to give them our tax returns to due diligence. Okay, but you got the P&Ls. There is a reconciliation between the two. If there's any marketing materials, that type of stuff, asset lists, great. If they say to you, that's going to be during due diligence, that's okay, as long as they provide it quickly. But if there's anything related, like where one thing, here's one big disconnect. Buyer says to the intermediary, I want to break down their sales by customer. Okay. And this intermediary says, look, we're not giving it to you. Okay. And they say to the seller, this guy Daniel's completely unreasonable, has no clue what he's doing. In your mind, you just needed to get, I want a listing of customers numbered 1 through 10 and the amount of business that they did. You didn't want the customer name. You didn't need the customer address. All you wanted to see if there's any concentration, right? They're looking at it and saying, we're not going to give them that type of information this early on. So very often the message is wrongly presented, if that makes sense to you. So that's why the conversation is good, so you can walk through. But again, I would push for as much as possible. Sometimes you're pressed. There's other offers, whatever. You might have to get in an offer without it, but press for what you believe is really meaningful to help you write an LOI that you're going to be able to stick to. Because you want to write an LOI and not change the terms. I mean, that's the goal.
And not spend a bunch of money like you mentioned too, right? So yeah.
I didn't hear what you said. Sorry.
And also not spend a ton of money on third parties before getting the basics.
No, and with the numbers, and again, these were in prior sessions that we talked about, you got to take the numbers first. That's the easiest part of due diligence. Numbers are numbers. Numbers don't lie. They're math. People lie. And so it's math. When you get the numbers, you have to look at the numbers yourself first. Because if they don't make sense to you, I guarantee you they're not going to make sense to your accountant. No matter your level of expertise on accounting, and we have one lesson devoted to accounting, I guarantee people in one lesson your confidence level, if you're not, will go from 0 to 90 because it's pretty simple. Again, it's math, and you don't even have to be good in math. But yes, those type of things are what you want to get early enough so that you could review them yourself. Because if not, you have this whole thing with failed deal costs. People always ask me about, how do I deal with failed deal costs with attorneys? Well, if you do this diligently, you shouldn't have a whole lot of failed deal costs. Because it's very easy to give your financials over to the accountant and they charge you $5,000. They come back and say, numbers don't work. Well, you could have done that on your own. Even contracts, for example. We're going to talk about briefly in the next webinar, but you need to get copies and due diligence of all the contracts that the company is involved in, leases, insurance agreement, whatever. You don't have to be an attorney. All you need to have is a little bit of common sense. You read through the contracts, you'll find 70% of the things that stick out that may be concerning. Before you give it to your attorney looks at it, they'll spend 10 hours, right? They could spend $5,000 just reviewing the contracts versus you say to them, here's the 4 things that I want you to look at. Oh, there's Torrance. Okay. Cam, you look very relaxed.
Oh, Cam, you're on mute.
I can't hear you. You're on mute.
No, I'm just taking it all in. Some of this marketing thing was very relevant for me because the one I'm looking at right now, yeah, the key salesperson passed away about 6 months ago.
Who took over their
So,
accounts?
sorry?
Who took over their accounts?
The significant other that was also employed by the company was the sort of the assistant to the husband and wife team.
So
And
the significant other of the salesperson,
yes,
and they're planning on staying,
yes.
and they're doing a good job.
I'm told that they are, and they become an employee, and they want some consistency. So, um,
Wow, interesting scenario.
yeah, yeah. So I got some interesting. I'm trying to get my head around it, and then I have to look at the actual people who perform the actual work on site is as well. So I have to look at some um vendor diligence as well because it's there could be a concentration on the service providers who actually do the work for them as well. So and I feel like this is an interesting one where I think there's probably I think dig in on that one a little bit more because what if they with that weakness on the sales side, maybe they can just go do the work themselves directly and just cut this company out.
Correct.
So
So,
I've
yes.
got some thinking to do.
No, but it's good. But you're actually thinking about it. Your mental maps are good. You're doing it in a very good way because the one of the key points that you brought up, which I think will be very helpful to everybody on the call, is you're looking at the sales function, but here's a supplier. There might not just be customer concentration, there could be supplier concentration. And what is the cost for this individual to go become a competitor? How easily? And if you don't have a specific, protected, somewhat proprietary product, how easily can people move around? Now, my experience, people don't move that quickly, meaning going into their own business, but it does happen because it takes a special breed. You're all that special breed. They're going to go into your own business, but not everybody is like that. But it is a potential threat. So how do you tie that down? And you may not be able to, but you're like I said, your mental maps are good. You're looking at it in a really good way, thinking about all the the what if scenarios, and um, um, hopefully you have the opportunity to, of course, speak to that the significant other who took over from the salesperson, but also that contractor. And by the way, when you speak with the owner of the business and say, look, this is a concern of mine related to the contractor, I need to speak to that contractor, they may push back substantially because they don't want to know that the business is for sale. So in some of those cases, Cam, you may need to have those as a last contingency or one of the final contingencies.
Yeah, and that's so just how I'm thinking about it, and as you know, each day I try to refine my thinking on it because you have to kind of really put yourself in actually having that conversation with that contractor. Like you have to kind of almost sort of think what's going to happen in that meeting when it does take place. Um, so that's one level. What I have to also think about is because the business is in the U.S. and I'm in Canada.
We're in
One
Canada.
thing, yeah, in Calgary. So I'm thinking about okay, well, how different, and the business is 100% in the U.S. Um, so I have to think about, let's say if the proverbial crap hits the fan, how do I get down there? How often do I get down there? How much issue I'm going to have with the border services and all that stuff? Like so that I know I'm thinking of all the things. One thing is stuff happens in a business. That's just reality. And so I was
Yes.
peculiar about when one of the other gentlemen asked a question on, locational and things like that. I mean, that was sort of it was very, very resonant. It was resonating with me because I'm of the same belief and I'm very hands on. But in this case, you can't really argue and negotiate your way with a border services agent.
Yeah, no,
Right?
absolutely. I mean, I have a high level of concern about operating a business remotely, especially when you acquire it. It's my experience is you got to get in, you got to roll up your sleeves, you got to
Yeah.
get your fingernails dirty, and you got to work that business. And once you understand that business, I had a business in Canada with retail merchant. I had people, you'll understand this, from St. John's, Newfoundland to Victoria
Yeah.
Island. We had employees, we had 200 employees, which in US terms, about like 2,000 employees. I didn't meet 98% of them, but the offices, the regional offices that we had, we had one hub, and then we had to open up regional offices to make sure that these people and those managers were managing the people, and we visit those regional offices. But when you have a cross-border situation, if you don't have an understanding of the business, it gets away from you fast. If something goes wrong, I mean, it's bad enough if you have a problem to deal with, but if you have a problem and you can't even get there, or you have a problem and you're not even there, and there's problems that are going to surface that by you not being there, you're not even going to be aware of. So I don't mean to crap on your parade as we talk about. It's just from a practical standpoint. I mean, there's just no escaping the fact that you got to understand the business and you've got to be there to operate it. And over time, you can make some of these changes. But at the beginning, and hopefully this ties in more to what Gabe was talking about, at the beginning, you got to get in there. You've got to be in there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, so I've got to mitigate some things as to how what different kinds of entrepreneurs visas are there. The fellow who currently owns it has operated from Canada, actually. But and how and the what but there's a difference. He had been doing it for a good 10 plus years. So I think there's a difference. There's a difference. But when a new player is coming in, it just rattles everybody, right or wrong. And everybody starts to think. It's just like when an employee quits in a business, two employees who weren't even thinking about it, they start thinking, well, should I be doing something? That sort of stuff is common, just given human nature. And so that's why I need to kind of mitigate and look at what kind of entrepreneur visa types are available. And there's E2 and E10, I think, is the two types.
Right.
So I got to figure out what the just to mitigate if I'm serious about it. So I got to run some concurrent processes that I hadn't thought of that I was contemplating before when I was looking at it.
Well, again, I believe you're looking at it in a really good way. And so understanding, you're not falling in love with the business before you understand, it's great to think about all these things, but you're not falling in love with the idea of the business versus you're going through this in a very good way, in a practical way, and seeing this properly to make sure you're not just pushing to make this work. You're pushing, you want to understand, can this work realistically in a practical way, which is, I think you're doing a great job.
Right. Thank you for all the help.
Of course, man.
So I don't know if you've been reading the chats. I think they're all to me, but Richard, we've got a lot of interesting questions here. So if you don't mind, I'm gonna
let them rip.
I'm just gonna pick on some folks here. I know Gabe, you're in the car, so I don't know. Do you want to ask the question or
let's go to the next one? Oh yeah, Gabe can go. Okay, he's there. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I was just gonna ask, is there any Facebook group or any type of networking group with I don't know, other people who are looking to buy businesses? Do you have anything like that?
Okay, so fasten your seatbelts. Some of those groups are the worst things you could possibly do. Okay, there's the most popular one is Search Funder. Okay, and here's my take on it, Gabe. You got 1,000 people in some of these groups that they're all looking to buy a business. They're all people similar to you, starting out, full of energy, all excited, or other people that are buyers. They have no experience, no track record, no operational experience, and no success yet. And they're all asking questions and getting answers from people that have no operational experience, no track record, no success yet. That's the wrong group to be involved in. If you want to get into some of the group, get into some of the entrepreneurial groups, mentor groups, business owner groups, as opposed to people that are looking, because you want to surround yourself with people that are already at where you want to be versus people that have the same problem for you. In other words, you don't want to ever surround yourself with people that have the same problem. You want to surround yourself with people that have solved the problem, okay? Because if not, you're all just feeding off each other. It's like when you see two kids get together at the playground, they start getting all hyper together. They're feeding off each other, right? I mean, so it's similar to that. Just try to get into good groups that are that people that are doing what you want to do. The business owner groups or the business buyer groups, some of them are pretty, I read them all in the posts that are, some of them that blow my mind. So I would try to align yourself more with more mentor type groups, that people that could really provide you with some really good guidance. And again, fundamentally they're already at where you want to be. That's personally my take.
Got it. Thank you.
Of course. Okay, see ya. Let her rip.
Awesome. So, Torrance, do you want to ask or shall I ask, my friend?
And Torrance, I got an email from you, so I know I owe you a response. I saw that today.
Yeah, I sent it pretty late, so I know I didn't give you a fair chance to look at it. But only question I had was about accounting. Is there an actual area where we can look at? I have to package the core training course. Is there an area we can look at for the accounting, or is it just in due diligence? Because it seems like it's a lot of accounting. So is there one particular area we should pay attention to, Richard?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that you want to do is, yeah, you have the due diligence package where we walk through the financials to look at the income statement, etc. What you want to do is when you get into the due diligence, as long as you have the financials, when I say the complete financials, the P&Ls, the balance sheet, the list of the assets, etc., you go through them first. The core function of financial due diligence is the validation of the information, meaning that there's a proper paper trail established. And if you don't have a high degree of acumen in financials, as long as at the beginning they make sense to you, this is one case where you let your accountant do the work. Okay, because if not, if you're not, and even if you're really polished in accounting, it's very easy to get into due diligence and spend all your time in the financials, and there's so much more to investigate. So what I would suggest that you want to do, like in the one that you sent me, for example, you'll look at the numbers yourself, you'll see if the basic reports make sense, and then you'll let your accountant do the paper trail, because they're doing like almost a mini audit. Now, the other thing, and I'm not sure, Torrance, if you were on your last call, for any of you buying a business in the United States, there's a form called 4506, 4506. Everybody make a note of that if you're in America. That is a form where the seller will sign that allows you to get a copy, a transcript of their tax return. Not too many people file false tax returns, but it happens. Okay. And so your accountant is the one that should ask for it. You just get a copy of the transcript to make sure that what they're presenting you is actually legitimate, because there are crazier things that have happened. So hopefully, Torrance, that answered your question. You do a cursory review, make sure it makes sense, but then your accountant is going to do a real deep dive to do follow the paper trail.
Yeah, and the good thing about this company, Richard, they actually sent me an overwhelming amount of paperwork, like the last 2 or 3 years of taxes. I sent you the CIM, which is like 18 pages. So they're very cooperative. So I'm just going through all the paperwork. I've been dealing with them for like 2 weeks now.
That's a great sign.
SBA, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great sign, because when sellers, if they have a broker that's involved and the broker's making sure that you're getting good information in a timely manner, it's not only makes the whole process easier, but it gives you some insight into how the business is run.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a wonderful thing. I mean, it really sounds like it's very, very helpful.
Yeah. And another quick note, my bank officer and their broker know each other. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. I asked him, are y'all friends? He said, no, we've done business in the past. So I'm trying to make sure they're not cousins. Right? Let's make sure how close they are before I get. But he assured me they're not. They work together. He recognized the name, so that was.
And that's the banker who's going to do the SBA lending?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. No, that's a good thing, because it's you want to pass, and the business got to pass, and if the deal terms and they make sense and they're favorable, I mean, it's great that they have a relationship, because my guess is SBA loans sometimes can take quite a bit of time, and if the broker has a good relationship, they could light a fire under their butt to get the get the deal moving. So that's good.
Thank you, sir.
Go ahead, Sia.
Do I look like I was going to ask a question? I'm kidding. No, not.
It looked like you're going to ask 10.
No. I just wanted to reiterate, these are a lot of great questions that are coming down. I'm getting a lot of questions. So for those that have not bought the course yet, please do. It is such a great investment. And so I'm going to be the one to do the sales pitch here for you, because, Richard, you know how Richard is, everybody. He's very self-effacing. So if I may just, toot the horn of the illustrious leader here, presenter.
Okay, Sia, go ahead.
I'm taking over, dang nabbit. So seriously, everyone raise your hand or just put the applause button up there for those that have purchased this course. Right? So if you have not yet, and you are just starting out, so Gabe, I know you said you're just starting out, it's a $197 investment.
Gabe is on board.
Oh, Gabe's already on board. Well, geez.
Oh, yeah.
Be
Got
like
a
Gabe,
nice phone
everyone.
call.
Be like
Gabe
Gabe.
Gave
It's
us my
100.
prize student now.
Literally, you guys, for the cost of like coffee for like what, 2 months, maybe, you're going to get an actual course that's very thorough. So I have nothing to gain on this, you guys. I'm just Richard Parker's groupie. That's all. I'm not under employee of him in any capacity of this way. But you guys definitely check it out. And then for those that have not, please, if you have a YouTube account, follow, like, and subscribe. There is a dedicated playlist to all of these webinars. And if you want access to that private Q&A, highly recommend you guys, if you just pay for this $197, you get access to that Q&A as well. And so I know Richard's also brewing up other ideas as well to keep offering value for you guys, because his goal really is to get you to that closure. I've been hearing it, you guys, and I don't think I've ever met anyone more genuine. This is not too good to be true. I know it sounds like it, but it's not. And if anyone that knows me, I'm not BS either. So I just want to give you guys just a heartfelt shout out. Pay the damn $200, okay? I mean, I don't know what else to tell you.
See,
Anyway.
you're a beauty. You're a beauty. So
Yes,
thank you.
yes,
I appreciate that. I appreciate, of course, everybody who's here today. And one of the most important things I think that everybody will agree with, probably the biggest benefit when we talk about the materials is, these conversations, the back and forth, these webinars. But we also have anybody who purchases the course, you can email me, call me anytime. I'm happy to get on a call. I never charge you for this. I don't do this if it doesn't matter to me if I never sell another course. My standard of living doesn't change. But the consulting piece of the business, and like Todd and Mary, we've had, I don't know, 5 or 6 different calls and preparation for meetings and LOIs and whatever. And I can assure you that by the time you get to buying a business, I guarantee you that the couple $100 you spend for the course, I'll bet anybody on this call that they'll tell me it's worth 10 times that, minimum, maybe 100 times. So it's I do this because I love doing this and like people to get to where I've been so blessed in my life, and I'm at the stage where it's my obligation to educate people and hopefully you're able to accomplish what I've been able to achieve. And it's pretty easy once you know how to do it and do it in a meaningful way and have the right guidance. So hopefully you'll join our ongoing group. Okay. Any more questions? See ya.
We have Torrance's hand is up.
Okay, Torrance.
Oh, see, I was just saying I have the course. That was my hand up for having the course.
Oh, got it. Okay. Thank you, Torrance.
Well, thank you for the support.
Who else? And you said you had some chat questions or people texted you questions. Yeah.
Yep. I think we went through most of it. There were just more inquiries around the course and whatnot. So we got all that
Beautiful.
done.
Okay. I'll just go through, if you fire up the next slide, tell you what we've got going on next, and some timing and things that you should take a look at, which is, if you go to our main website, richardparker.com, there's a lot of articles there in the article section. If you hit that, it drops down and it's presented in a way of the steps of the business buying process. So you could read specific articles. They're all free, of course. So that's very valuable on richardparker.com. We also have, I've been on, I think there's about, I'm close to 80 now podcasts in the last 6 months. And we try to upload the podcast in the final session. There's some real good ones there. But sometimes the host could take 2 months till they get the session delivered. So I think there's, I don't know, probably 55, 60 that are posted already, but there's some real good information. The YouTube channel, we have, and if you go into the playlist area, there's all the webinars that we've done. And I think there's probably, I don't know, see what, there's probably close to 20 hours of webinars there now, right?
Easily.
And so starting with the ones like, I know that I've got a tremendous amount of feedback related to the one called The Right Business and How to Find It, which is especially for you, those of you who haven't identified or still concerned what type of business is right for you. It's a really meaningful way to walk you through that process and to create quality deal flow. So that if you go to playlists and webinars and pick the thumbnail, so that's pretty easy. What else have I got here as far as general housekeeping? The next webinar is going to be July the 18th. We'll send out an email to everybody. If you do decide to order the course, do not order the due diligence program. The due diligence program is included with the course. So you see on richardparker.com, there's a link there and says courses. It's how to buy a good business at a great price. And the due diligence, I think called the due diligence mastery program. You don't need the due diligence program. It's included with how to buy a good business at a great price. For our clients July the, when is it? You said July the 12th is the next Q&A. And if you have any questions, our clients, just email or call me. I'm heading out of town after this afternoon for a couple of days. And I know there's a couple, you have some emails and you sent today, George and Terrence, but Torrance, and I'll go through those. But other than that, email me anytime, and look forward to chatting with all of you. And I appreciate everybody's time today. And hopefully you learned a little something.
So if I may add one more little thing, because I have a mouth and I just can't help it, is business buying banter. You guys, if you guys want to see the more laid back more than this, he does have his other podcast and live stream, and it's called Business Buying Banter. It is on YouTube. I think I've shared it over in the chats before. You guys, please, if you have an account with YouTube,
a lot of
please
fun.
kindly like and subscribe. And for those that are looking and learning about SBA and the whole process around that, SBA lending, reach out to Deb Curtis, which is Richard's co-host on Business Buying Banter. And Deb, unfortunately, couldn't make it this time around, but she is a wealth of information as well. And I will just throw this out there for anyone that is curious or interested on the sales and marketing side of things. I have 20 years in tech sales, and I also have my own marketing agency, if you will, predominantly around social media. So if you guys want to just throw me and lob me a question, feel free to DM me on LinkedIn. And if you're connected with me, I'm always on LinkedIn. So just ping me.
And one of the things, Sia, was, folks, when you're looking at businesses and you want to understand we talked about today, it's so timely, the marketing, if they have any type of digital marketing initiative and you want to get, a second set of eyes on it, so often, the whole thing about buying a business, especially for people who haven't done it before, you got to align yourself with believable parties. And that's why, to Gabe's question earlier related to who you should network with and whatever, get believable parties, people who've done that, or I used to talk about the number one draft pick that's available to be your consultant. This term believable parties is one that, when I was partners with the Dalio family, my late partner, used to call it, and Ray always used to refer to it as a believable party. So you want to align yourself always with believable parties. So if there's a digital footprint attached to the business they're investigating and you want to run something by Sia, send her an email or connect with her on LinkedIn, because she could bring a very, very good lens to what you're looking at. Because especially if digital marketing is something you're not really familiar with, it's very easy for someone to sell you, a whole storyline about the digital marketing, where she may be able to look in pretty quickly and give you some ideas. So we're always, everybody here is here to help, and look forward to helping you along the road.
And when you make your $1 billion, just remember SYYA.
That's the first billion or the second. Thank you, Sia. I always appreciate having you. And thank you to everybody who participated today. And look forward to seeing you again soon.